Hello, Internet world. My name is Chris Lenshyn. I am a MennoNerd, coming live and in living color from the west coast of British Columbia, Canada. I'm joined here by Greg Rabus from Germany, the land of beer, bratwurst, and the Bundesliga. I'm very excited to chat with Greg and maybe his wife Jen, if she has a moment or two to join us. They are doing a lot of really cool stuff in Germany, particularly around church planting, Anabaptism, all that good stuff. So I'm really excited to talk with Greg. So my inner Mennonite nerd will be coming out during this conversation. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm really happy to be here.
Good. Well, I guess first off, let's just do something called Stupid Question. So I'm a youth pastor by trade, I guess, and one of the things that we do at the beginning of each of our events is ask a stupid question just to get to know the person a little bit more. So stupid question of this interview will be, if you could combine two animals, what two animals would they be, and what would you name it? This speaks volumes about who you are as a person, Greg. So tread carefully.
In university, so I'm originally from the States, and when I went to university, I played ultimate frisbee, and I'm a rather long-legged fellow. So I was often compared to a gazelle, and so I guess if I was to have any spirit animal of any kind, then a gazelle would certainly be that. But as for a second one, gosh, well, we're here in Mannheim, in Germany. It's the city where we live, and it's actually called Eishockeystadt Mannheim, which is really good for Canadians. It's the city of ice hockey. We don't have our own real Bundesliga team, our own football team, so ice hockey is one of the big ones, and so our team is the Adler, the Eagles. So I guess combining that sort of American history, the Canadian, and the Mannheim, Germany, all together, you'd sort of have like an Adler Gazelle.
Well done. That's very impressive. I guess we'll just jump right into it. I would like to explore a little bit about your work and your work with MC Canada Witness. All that stuff that you're doing. Thank you so much for forwarding those newsletters on to me, and maybe we'll attach those to the comments on the edited version of this when it hits YouTube, the recorded version, because there's lots of well-written story there that talks about your work in very specific ways, but it also gives us lots of things to talk about because because of your work with community, with refugees, with interreligious peacemaking, all of those things that are very prominent. It sounds like in Germany, where you are in Mannheim, I believe, and for that kind of stuff, to hear those types of stories and how you folks are doing that, it's very informative to us in different contexts too. I think, particularly in mine, where we're engaging the same exact type of things, peacemaking. What does that look like in a multi-religious context? Some of these things that are very pertinent. So I guess the first just introductory question to set context, can you talk a little bit about how you came to this place in Germany with Mennonite Church Canada Witness, and what is the story behind you being in that particular place at this particular time?
Well, Jen and I, my wife, we have a very winding sort of story. So Jen grew up in southwestern Ontario, in New Hamburg, near Kitchener-Waterloo, and isn't from Mennonite stock, so to say. Her family's Baptist, but they went to a Mennonite church from a very young age, and so her whole religious background, her real core is Mennonite. And I'm from the States, grew up in a pretty mainstream Lutheran church, but when I met Jen, actually felt like I found my faith family when she told me about the Mennonites. She actually showed me the website for Mennonite Central Committee for the first time, and I was bowled over by the fact that there existed this sort of religious tradition that combined all those things that I really was looking for but had never found before: the community, the peace, all those good Mennonite things. And basically since then we've lived very Mennonite lives. We lived in Montreal for a while when Jen was doing her her master studies at that time, and we started going to the Montreal Mennonite Fellowship. So that was the first Mennonite congregation that I really got to know. And anybody who has been there before knows that the Montreal Mennonite Fellowship meets in a community center. It's a building right in the middle of the city in a very popular, just really hip sort of neighborhood. And what they have there is quite a lot of programs, a student residence and language classes, and really a lot of ways to connect with the community. And so we got to know this community center, Maison de l'Amitié, House of Friendship, and we got to know the Montreal Mennonite Fellowship. I became a member of MFM, and I started working with MCC, Mennonite Central Committee, for the House of Friendship as the language program coordinator there. And so my introduction into the Mennonites has been very much, you kind of find out about it and then you sort of rung into it 100%, because what else would you do?
That's right.
But my background is also German. My family is German and we have a lot of contacts there. And I'd always wanted to do my master's degree in Germany, and it worked out for Jen that we both came here in 2010 to the city of Tübingen to do master's degrees. She in church history, she's doing her doctorate, or was doing it at that time, and I was doing it in Middle Eastern studies in Tübingen. And then there was the question, what do we do from there? And that's when we started getting to know the Mennonites in Germany, and maybe we'll talk a little more about their situation later too, but we started working with them in kind of the areas of church planting and church renewal, and that was in 2013, so we've been at it for now a good 3 years. And it has evolved to where we are now in the Mannheim, Ludwigshafen area.
Wow, that's quite the intricate story. I like how it seems to me that often I'm talking to people who are learning about Anabaptism and are kind of geeking out a little bit that there's actually a religious faith tradition that syncs so well with some personal values of peacemaking, centering around Jesus, those types of things. And in some of my conversations, it seems that it's a global thing, and I'd like to hear a little bit about, like you referenced earlier, about the Mennonites in Germany. So you've got experience with Anabaptism, Mennonites in Montreal, and so what does it look like to be Anabaptist in a German context, and how does that Anabaptism kind of collide in that particular place in that particular time?
That's an interesting question, because I think unlike other countries that maybe would be relatively new to an Anabaptist presence, Germany has one of the oldest Anabaptist presences, and the churches that came from that time, or who descended from the whole Anabaptist movement in the 1500s, are in a large part still here. And so, looking at the history of Germany, we have gotten to know a lot of the Mennonite churches that are here. So in Ludwigshafen, the city that we're working in, there's a Mennonite congregation that's been here for about 300 years, and that's typical of a lot of the other ones around here. And they were definitely influenced by they were allowed to come to Germany because they were tolerated, and they were allowed to stay as long as they didn't proselytize, as long as they kept quiet, stayed on their farms, and so they really were, the sort of stereotypical silent in the land. And so being Mennonite here was much more about being a family church, not even really an ethnicity. You don't really have the same kind of like Mennonite foods or Mennonite ways of singing or that sort of thing here. It is much more, there are the Anabaptist values, but it is much more of kind of a family church. And just recently, there's sort of been this idea that, no, we should engage with the rest of society, that we should branch out, and some people sort of looking to North America to latch onto now what we call more Anabaptist values, or to maybe refine the Anabaptist values from the original time and see how they fit to this context. Right. So that's sort of a long way of saying that there are a number of Mennonite churches, but there's maybe sort of a limited sense of Anabaptism in Germany. I think you'll find that to varying degrees in all the different congregations, but a lot of times it tends to be individuals who really hold the flag of like the Anabaptist values, as opposed to just being a free church, which means not part of the two state churches, the state Protestant and the Catholic churches.
Right. Is that a significant dynamic for Anabaptism in Germany? Because I'm remembering my time in Germany, and a lot of the churches were very closely tied and associated with the state. And it was very rare that I would meet somebody who wasn't baptized as an infant and kind of registered with the local parish, some of those things. So what's the dynamic between a free church like Anabaptism and maybe some Catholic, and I mean the track here is getting into religious conversation and things like that, but what are the dynamics there between Anabaptist churches and other churches that are present in your area?
I'll keep that a little short, but basically what there is, for example, there's a big ecumenical movement in Germany, but really when people say ecumenism, what most people are talking about is dialogue between the state Protestant and the Catholic churches. And they are almost 100% of the Christian landscape. The remaining 1-point-something% would be the free churches, mostly non-German. I think the Anabaptists would actually be one of the only native ones, but then you have the Methodists and the Baptists, the free evangelicals. And what makes them free churches is that they aren't linked to the state system. What's interesting here is that even though the idea of maybe like personal piety varies very much from church to church, what's common in Germany is the idea that the church provides state services. A lot of the preschools are run by churches. A lot of the nursing homes are run by churches. And even in the cities, the social workers who deal the most with refugees are all employed by the church and are therefore, in some sense, the word government workers. Mm-hmm. And so the church is really expected to do a lot of these diakonische, we say in German, sort of responsibilities. And the Mennonite Church, as well as all the other small churches, are kind of the mouses around the elephants, I guess. Our pastor at Ludwigshafen complains that every time that she's in sort of ecumenical gatherings, she really has to fight for a bit of a Mennonite perspective to come in there too, because otherwise it would just sort of be not really taken into consideration. And so, that being said, I think that Mennonites here are starting to find their voice. And although it's a very small community, I think that we're becoming more confident in speaking louder into society, and I think that is being recognized in different ways.
I'm curious about this. You were talking about the how churches were performing government service, and that's something that would be very, very difficult in North America, and particularly with fear of kind of right-wing evangelicalism and some of these things creeping into the actual service. And so what does that look like for those of us here in North America where those things are completely separated and the government services are quite secular?
I mean, the idea of church membership here goes back to the sense that membership in a church was sort of membership into society. And I think when you look at like Stuart Murray, that would be a lot of the talk about the Christendom sort of mentality, that once you're baptized, you become a member of the state. And so, again, like the question of personal piety is left to individuals, but the sort of government things are left to, in a lot of ways, to the churches. I think that when we say, because there's also very much a difference between sort of the normal churches that everybody's used to and small churches. When people say Sekt, like a sect, they really mean that in the sense of not just sectarian, but also kind of a dangerous culty sort of thing. And that's how a lot of even the free churches are looked at. I think I mean, it's just such a wide range of things, and I mean, there is a tendency to all throw them into one pot as well. You know, you get a lot of stuff from like the United States that sort of freaks Germans out, and that comes over here, and um, it might be against, German values, European values in a lot of ways. But I do think that the idea of belonging to a smaller church definitely brings on a sense of suspicion among people that you might not necessarily have in North America, where you really have like this kind of equal range of what we would call free churches. The Lutherans and the Baptists and the Methodists and the Pentecostals all sort of exist more or less next to each other.
I love how you frame that context for us, because earlier you referenced that your Anabaptist or your Mennonite is looking to find or amplify her voice within that kind of a setting. And so what has that looked like for the Mennonite Church in Mannheim to, in the midst of that, all of that stuff that you were talking about with Christendom and with Free Church, these smaller churches, where is the Mennonite voice there, and how is it interacting with that within that setting?
Well, what we're trying to do in Ludwigshafen, and maybe I'll talk more specifically about the actual project afterwards. But the idea, I think, is that first of all, we really want to hold up the fact that a lot of really good work is being done. We work right now the most with refugees because that is the problem or the issue in Germany right now, kind of what everybody needs to do. And when you look at it also from a religious or Mennonite perspective, that sort of peace-building work and relationship-building work, that's really, say in German, it's the big Baustelle, like that's the big construction zone at the moment. And we're working a lot with that. I think my hunch is what I see is there's a lot of services in order to learn German, to get jobs, to integrate into society. But what seems to be lacking is a lot of that sort of community-oriented stuff. And what we're trying to do with a community center in Ludwigshafen is really address the needs of individuals who might want to come out of isolation or just have the chance to meet other people, meet other Germans, and really have the chance to make relationships with people that they wouldn't have otherwise through a bunch of different and creative programs, and with a chance to participate themselves. So when I think of what can Mennonites do, like, it all goes back to those values of following Jesus in acceptance of the other, in hospitality, in showing love. That really person-to-person kind of relationship is what drives us and what we're trying to build.
And so you guys have lots of projects, and I think I'll talk about that in just a second. But I'm curious about the church that you're part of there. Can you share a little bit about some of those, what it's like to be part of a community there like that, and then we'll talk about these really cool things that you guys are doing.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, when we started working with the Mennonites here, the idea was to start a brand new church in the city of Mannheim, where we are, because there is no Mennonite church, but there's a number of smaller rural congregations around us. But what we ended up doing was really having good relationships with the closest Mennonite church to us. You basically think of Mannheim, and then the Rhine River, and then Ludwigshafen on the other side. And Ludwigshafen is kind of the sort of the poorer, younger sibling of Mannheim. It's the more industrial, the big company BASF, the chemical concern, is there. And so it's not a very pretty sort of place, a little more down and out. But there's a Mennonite church there, untypically for Mennonites in Germany, right in the middle of the city. Most congregations are rural. This one is right downtown. And we got to know the congregation. It's a small congregation, mostly older folks, 70 and above. There are about 5 members, 2 married couples and another person. When I say younger couples, I mean more like in their late 40s, 50s to 60s, who are carrying all of the weight of the church. Or not all of the weight, but are basically doing most of the day-to-day tasks. they would really like to be more active in the community, but are kind of at their limits as to what they can do. But they have this big building in the middle of the city that kind of stands empty in the middle of the week. For years, other Mennonites and other people have said, well, you have this thing, why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you doing more with this? And I think that was coming from a big perspective of judgment towards them, but maybe not necessarily willing to work with them. Whereas I think as we got to know them and really realized that we see eye to eye on a lot of things and actually made some really strong bonds, I think that was the thing that made this sort of partnership possible, where that church is able to continue existing as it is, but then we can work out of the church building and start making this community center in and around it. So it's these two dynamics that are sort of separate but have a lot of flow in between each other. And that's sort of the dynamic that we found, and that's working quite well. And I mean, from our side too, it gives us a church community. Coming into Mannheim and saying, I actually found this very difficult, saying that we were, church planters from North America for the Mennonites. First of all, church planters, kind of strange. North Americans, okay, take that as you will. And Mennonites, you mean Mormons? Like, just everything about us we sort of had to explain the first time that we would meet somebody. But what we find is being attached to the Mennonite Church in Ludwigshafen, it's already there, it's already a presence, and working from there. It's a very, I don't want to say like symbiotic relationship, but it's a relationship that's mutually life-giving, I would say, for both of us.
Can you share about the use of that building and how that came about? You shared that a little bit already, but I would imagine that there is some other dynamics at play when you start something like that impacts or tries to impact a community in such a way that you folks started out. So if you could share a little bit about where the idea came from, and how you actually put that into practice using that building for that specific thing.
Yeah, certainly the experience in Montreal with the House of Friendship was formative. I think for both of us, that's just really an example of the way that a church can function in terms of having a spiritual side, but also a real like outreach side component to it. And I think when we saw that in the middle of the city, in the Ludwigshafen church, then it just sort of made sense that you would try to do something with it. And I think that the refugee situation in Germany has also done a lot to give us direction for the first phase of this community center. So just to give a little bit of context, like people have probably heard that a lot of refugees have come to Europe in the past year or two. In 2015 alone, it was 1.1 million refugee claimants in Germany, which is more than 1 in every 100 Germans. And maybe not a majority, but a lot of them would be from Syria or Afghanistan. And Germany was really overwhelmed with this huge number of people. They were distributed to every city, and so every city has a fixed number of refugees based on that city's population. So there's no like ghettos with refugees anywhere in Germany. It's really every single place in the country. So Ludwigshafen has quite a few, but Ludwigshafen doesn't really have the infrastructure to house and support all of these people. And so just 200 meters away from where the Ludwigshafen Mennonite Church building is a parking lot where they've erected a couple of provisory tents that house 100 people each. So you have sort of this big parking lot with 200 people living there, mostly young men, with really nothing to do during the day except if they have German courses, they would go to those. But you have people living in like such close quarters with each other. You don't have any free time, or you don't have any like free space. It's a real kind of hopeless sort of situation. People get drunk at night. Nobody gets any sleep. So it's a real bad sort of thing. What there are is refugee cafes in Ludwigshafen, where once a week you go to a church or a community center, like a cafe, and refugees would be invited to come, and you have coffee and cake. It's a very German thing. And that's a place for them to go and network and meet people. And so I made it a point to go to those very regularly, and just got to know a lot of people there, and really asked, okay, what are the needs here? What could we do to help? And what came up the most were two things. One, German practice, because they have their lessons, but they don't have enough conversation practice, or just practice with real people. And then the second was just meeting people, getting out of their isolation. They're with other refugees, but don't really have the chance to make contacts with people from the community. So in March and April of this year, we started German conversation courses. I tried to get people from the church as well to come and help out, and refugees who have been here for a while too to help out as well, and English conversation discussion groups. And that more with the idea of getting Germans and refugees together, and being able to speak eye to eye with each other in a common foreign language. So we did that for March and April. I think especially the conversation courses, we got a core group of guys who were really enthused by it and really got a lot out of it, and would then start coming to us with problems, and if they needed help with this or that, they trusted coming to us. And by the end of the session, it was really cool because they said, well, what are you guys doing on Sunday? We see that you have a kitchen here in the church. What if we came over and cooked everybody like a big meal and we could all get together? And I'd really have not met the Mennonite who has said no to an offer like that. And so by their initiative, we had this big meal together in the church, and it was just a really amazing moment. And so that's where I kind of see the potential of this, in just building this kind of really sort of rough around the edges, but still intentional kind of community space.
That's really cool. And it sounds so easy. I just went and talked to some guys and people, and these are the two things they said they needed. So we just kind of did it, and that's a really, as I'm sure it's a bit more complex than that. But
the first time that I had the conversation course, I had everything set up. Everything was not really sure if it would be like 5 people or 30 people. I've talked to hundreds. Who's gonna all come, and it was flies. Not a single person came.
Wow, how long did it take for people to start showing up?
A few weeks, and it really just once you meet somebody who invites other people, and then they invite other people, like you just need to find that thing that starts the momentum.
So that I think that's a pretty special thing that you guys are doing, and I would like to maybe pry a little bit into the German. Maybe if you could be general for a little bit in terms of how refugees have been accepted or engaged or integrated into the German context as refugees, and kind of give us a picture of why the work you're doing is important.
We were in Canada for 3 months this year as well, from May to July. Witness workers do every 3 years a 3-month itineration and visit congregations, and there I had the chance to talk with a lot of people working with refugees in Canada as well. That was really interesting because every congregation that we went to also had a refugee family or had applied to get one, and so this was really a subject that we could talk a lot about. And what struck me is that in Canada, people talked quite a lot about belonging, and that it wasn't just the individual's responsibility to feel like they belong, but also the community. Like, how can we help you feel like you belong? And so that's really like the language that comes from a multicultural society, where belonging really is that key component of being Canadian. In Germany, we talk much more about integration, and by that we mean very specific things. There's the Grundgesetz, basically, which is the constitution that has a couple of like basic, European humanistic rights. Say, democracy, equality of men and women, so on and so forth, and those are the things that one has to accede to integrate into society. But then the feeling of belonging is really a personal prerogative. Either you feel like you belong because it suits your personality, or it takes you 30 years, or you never feel like you belong. And Germany in the past has had a lot of immigration, especially from Turkey, about 20% or so of any German city will be Turkish. And that's been really a mixed bag in how people have integrated and how they feel a part of German society. Germans are also very conscious of the past, and very conscious of the idea of the ugly German or the fascist German that people really want to try to move away from. And so when the refugees came in September of 2015, there was an extremely powerful movement of people that were trying to build what's called a Willkommenskultur, like a welcoming culture, a culture of welcome, saying that on the basis of human rights, it is our responsibility as a rich nation to accept people who are coming from a war-torn area. And so you have this current, which is really inspiring and good. But on the other hand, you also have a lot of people who are very afraid of what's happening. If there's anything that Germans don't like, it's chaos. And what has been happening is a very chaotic situation. And so that's led kind of to for the first time to sort of a strengthening or maybe a mainstream movement of more kind of right-wing or parties that would be a little more nationalistic in their outlooks. So you really have these kind of two things working together, and as time goes on, it gets a little harder to be enthusiastic about all of these newcomers, and you kind of are more of the day-to-day problems. Finding work for all of these people is one of the extreme challenges. I mean, Germans just have very high educational standards, and transferable skills are really a difficult topic anyways. But when you have this massive amount of people with very differing degrees of education, some with very little education at all, integrating them into any kind of working market is difficult. But when you talk to refugees, like 9 out of 10, the main thing on their mind is, I need to find work, I need to find work. They need to support themselves, they need to support their families, they need to get their families over. And those are the problems that we're in right now. It's more like the second stage of this whole thing where a lot of people have come now. The mainstream has stopped because of agreements between Germany and Turkey, but we're really figuring out how people do integrate.
Yeah, it's like we're feeling those same tensions here in Canada with even in my community in Abbotsford. It's the same kind of thing where we're welcoming lots of folks, lots of refugees, and I'm not sure if we fully understand how much of an impact the influx of diversity will have on the community. I can't remember what the number is, but it's a significant amount of folks who are coming in from a different country, speaking a different primary language, some of these other dynamics, and at least from a bird's eye view, it looks like it's a pretty polarized conversation until you start kind of getting into little details, and in those details of integration, support, finding work, some of these things, you've got churches who are working towards those types of things and trying and learning, and then within those churches you have differing views about how to approach those different things, and it often ends up leaving the refugee in an interesting place, and that's why I'm really thankful to hear stories about how you are interacting with refugees, and I feel like what your Peace House is doing with these German conversation and these classes is beautiful. I think that's just a really cool thing for a good testimony for the work that you folks are doing, and how that can help others like us here in Abbotsford think about how we can love neighbor, essentially. And so I appreciate that very much. Like your bio that you sent off in the newsletter talks about some of these peace committees and things like that you're part of. Could you speak a little bit about those other initiatives that you're part of, and how are they impacting your work there in Mannheim?
So this is actually where my wife Jen would come in as well, because I've sort of been taking care of most of the day-to-day stuff of working with the Friedenshaus, the Peace House, but Jen has gotten involved with a lot of the sort of extra Mennonite stuff around here in Germany. So she sits, for example, on the board of the German Mennonite Peace Committee around here, and does a lot of different sort of work with that. So that's sort of one side of it. And then when we came to Mannheim with the idea of church planting, it's a very vague sort of job description, and you really have to make of that what you can. And so one of the things that I tried to do was go through the city and really find, okay, who are the people who are already working on peace issues, peace and justice issues. Specifically non-religious, because we wanted to see what was happening there as well. So I joined the Mannheim Peace Forum, Peace Committee, and have been active with them. That's been really fun because they do a lot of demonstrations about this area still has a lot of U.S. Army bases. There's one that's still, or two that are still quite active around here, and so there's a lot of discussion and protest of that. I've gotten the opportunity to do a couple speeches at some of these events. My favorite one has been in front of one of the American military bases on a rainy January day, where across the way you had kind of this concrete wall with barbed wire, and then a church and a church steeple on the other side. And it was just, for me, this really sort of discongruous picture of what, you have this sort of spiritual home on the one side, but then there's barbed wire in between. And so I actually did get to talk a little bit about that, and a little bit about Jesus and the gospel and stuff, sort of meshed into a speech that was then to a greater audience. And I think being able to do stuff like that and sort of share not just the faith, but like, what does the faith mean? Like, why is it important? Why does it inspire us? Why is it worth it? Has been a really great thing. And so we've both been keeping those contacts up with the Mannheim Peace Committee and with a couple of other things, and Jen, in any case, with the other Mennonite stuff.
So to look into this a little bit, I'm curious about what it's like for Anabaptist missionaries, church planters, peacemakers, part of MC Canada Witness. What are some of the hopes and the challenges that you encounter when you are Jesus-following people in a secular, non-religious, peacemaking conversation? What are some of the difficulties, and what are some of the hopes within those conversations?
I think the biggest thing that's occurred to Mennonites in general here is the question of reconciliation. What I found, because Germany has a lot of strong movements against the radical right, so pro-Nazi parties, or and there tends to be a lot of that. Not in the mainstream, but there's enough that there are groups that sort of stage counter-protests and make a lot of counter-literature. And a lot of the tone there is really quite aggressive. And in Ludwigshafen, the pastor of the church, Birgit, and I had discussed, do we want to have a Mennonite presence in these meetings? Do we want to be a part of these groups? And we've both gone to a couple and kind of had the same sort of hesitation about really kind of siding 100% with these. Like, on the one hand, we agree with a lot of the stuff, but on the other hand, it's sort of difficult. And one of our sort of church leaders here, Lisa Unger, people who went to the Mennonite Church World Conference in Harrisburg would remember her as the German organizer who was making a lot of the announcements. She's one of the leaders of our conferences. And she said recently that she asked people representing congregations to raise their hands and say, okay, how many people had contact to refugees? And everybody raised their hand. Everybody was doing something. She said, okay, how many people have contact to right-wing groups? Not a single person did. We didn't. And I think that sort of showed a big kind of empty spot in our work. If we're talking about reconciliation, we've kind of done a lot of the easy stuff, if you want to be self-critical. Working with refugees is easy. Like, it's easy relationships, and we're in a very privileged position where we can help, and it's not really that emotionally exhausting usually. but then making these really sort of, I mean, still German, so even more like familiar to us, but more difficult connections is a real spot where I think we need to do a lot of work. And so when we talk about, you know, Jesus is center of our faith, community center of our lives, and reconciliation center of our work, then where are the spots where we need to sort of point ourselves a little more to do some of this work? And I think a lot of us here would like to start doing that, and I'm sort of excited to see how that turns out, because right now, like, there really isn't that much.
Yeah, it's interesting that in your pursuit of that, you find yourself in a place where you're needing the skills to dialogue with people of different opinions well, and often one of the glorious things that I'm learning about peacemaking is, well, it's not that glorious, and oftentimes you're having conversations with people who disagree with you, or who are quite passionately disagreeing with you in different ways, and their actions also are linking up with their rhetoric, and so I feel what you're saying, because we find the same kind of elements here in Abbotsford. I'm sure other folks do as well, and the need for actual practical ability to do some of these things is really, really important. So as you got, I'm just saying this because when you guys continue these conversations, it would be great to hear and to kind of follow up a little bit on how some of this is going, and how we can learn from some of the dialogues that you guys are having in those very particular settings. I think to slowly wrap up our interview, I would like to maybe ask a little bit about what are your hopes and your dreams as Greg, and and maybe as a voice of your community for Anabaptism and the expression of Anabaptism following Jesus in Mannheim, and as somebody who's part of your conference as well, and the MennoNerds network in general, how can we support? What are some of the things and ways that we can be a digital presence for you?
I think life would be a good word. Not just that sort of like stagnating life support kind of feeling for a lot of churches, but really the sense that there are things working, there are things growing, there are things happening. And I think there's a lot of places where that is happening. So what I see for the Mannheim, Ludwigshafen area is I really hope that sort of life can take root, that hope starts bringing, that momentum starts. I hope that the community center sort of takes a lot of sort of unexpected directions, and that good peace work can happen. I hope that in the Ludwigshafen congregation that also leads to not growth for growth's sake, but growth for the sake of a thriving, healthy community of believers, that this is possible, and that can also spread and make waves in the city. In Mannheim as well, there's two other church planters who are from a Mennonite background who are also doing a church project here, and we're really excited about, we've been working with them, and we've been friends and involved with them, and we're looking forward to seeing how that goes. They have a different approach, and we're really excited to seeing maybe more of a house church kind of style develop. And so as these things happen, I just hope that there's enough momentum and life in it. So this would be, I think, personal and goals for the wider Mennonite community here. In terms of Anabaptism, maybe that we just continue to find our voice, that it continues to be not a sole voice, but a distinctive voice. I think because the German Mennonite community is so small, we kind of get washed up in a lot of other traditions, just because other traditions have more resources, have schools, have numbers. But I also think that there is something sort of distinct and unique about the Mennonite faith, the Mennonite tradition, in its emphases. Not to say that other churches don't have that in their own, but I think that there is an important voice here. So I'd like to see that continue to grow and thrive.
So, kind of the final question, I guess. What's immediately next for you guys in your work? What are some of the things that are kind of on the ground right now for you that is kind of giving us a small step of the big picture that you just spoke about?
We had our itineration in Canada. We came back. We hit the ground running. The Ludwigshafen church has actually decided to make renovations to their church. It was an old, falling apart kind of place with carpets that were holy and would trip you. Needed to be done, but this was sort of the prerogative that they needed to get that done. So we've been working pretty hard, hammer in hand, to make those renovations happen. And we got a couple people from Steinman Mennonite Church in Canada to come over and help us out with that as well. That's been great. So the renovations are mostly done now. The space is looking excellent. In 2 weeks now, we're expecting 2 more short-term volunteers, Carl and Marla Langelatz from Winnipeg, who are going to come. She's a pastor. He is a German and gym teacher, which are professions that really are going to help us a lot with making new programs and making new relationships. So we're looking forward to seeing them come and what their contributions are. So I think that's sort of what we're looking forward to at the moment. I'm looking forward to getting involved in the community as well. We have, for example, a former neighbor who had sort of a morally shaky job at a chemical concern, the one that I talked about earlier, and had recently quit that and is now starting a home business of relaxation and meditation techniques, and sort of being a specialist in that, and has heard about this project and asked if she could maybe do classes out of the Friedenshaus with that sort of thing. So we're going to be exploring a lot of different possibilities and working with the community. And yeah, excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I know Carl and Marla Langelatz well. I used to work with Marla as her assistant pastor in Winnipeg, and they're great. You're going to have a lot of fun with them, and I give you full permission to bug Carl like crazy. Just ride him the whole time he's there. Just make it an experience he will never forget. Many blessings to you and to your wife and the work that you guys are doing. It's really great to hear your the way that you've articulated it. Makes it sound like you really are thrilled to be able to do that work where you are, and we wish you the best as you guys both do it. And yeah, it's awesome. I think one thing that would be great is that we could add some of the links to the YouTube video that we're going to put on here with newsletters and stuff, and maybe a link to maybe some of the Mennonite Church Canada Witness stuff that you folks have, and for more information there, and if people just generally want to get in touch with you about some of the things you talked about, because you're building experience in places where people are needing to hear stories about what has worked and what hasn't, and why it's okay to keep pressing on when nobody shows up to a class. These types of things are important. So, so if you guys are up for that, that would be great. Okay.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys so much, Chris and Ryan, for giving us this platform, and taking the time to talk.
Hey everyone, this is Paul Walker. If you like what you just heard, be sure to check out more of what we have to offer at MennoNerds.com. It's the hub for all things MennoNerds. From there, you can learn more about these podcasts, syndicated blogs from people all over the world, books authored by some of our members, and a host of other exciting free resources for you and your church. Now, there's one last thing. What we do costs a bit of money, and we're always doing it on a volunteer basis. We have people that are committed to making this happen, but we could use more people. If you like what we do, please consider donating monthly. We have 2 options. You can either do a monthly donation through Patreon, or you can give a one-time donation at any time through PayPal. We love the work we do, but we do need your help to keep it going and to expand into new territory. If you would like to donate, check out MennoNerds.com/donate. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day.